Hello, and welcome to Saving People, Queering Things, a supernatural podcast. We were previously known as Driver Picks the Podcast, and the episode you're about to listen to was recorded under that name. Though our name has changed as of season 3, our show hasn't changed that much. Our structure and theme-based discussions are the same, and we're so glad you're here. Now, let's get on the road. Hello, and welcome to Driver Picks the Podcast, the show where we talk about ghosts, road trips, and free will through every episode of the TV series Supernatural. Today, we are exploring Season 2, Episode 10, Hunted, through the theme of trauma. I'm Abigail, your host, and joining me today again is KJ from Supernatural Opinions.
Hi, I'm so happy to be back.
So happy to have you back. So we're going to start with our series recap, The Road So Far. And I didn't actually write this out today because it just didn't happen. So we're just going to talk what's happened so far in season 2. So this is an unscripted series recap today. John Winchester is dead, having traded his life for Dean's. Thankfully, finally. Oh, I feel like a horrible person saying that, but also narratively, you know, it's a good thing.
Yeah, we like having Dean around, like a lot more than we would ever enjoy having John.
Yeah, we're picking. Yeah. And you know, Sam's honestly in a lot better position with Dean alive than he would be with John, as is evidenced by the fact that right before John died, he told Dean that he needed to save Sam, and if he couldn't save Sam, he would have to kill him. And
yeah, we finally learned that fact.
Yeah. So Dean has been carrying that information for 9 episodes, and also carrying the information for a couple of episodes that John made a crossroads deal, a demon deal, to save his life in the season premiere. So yeah, we've also met several more of these special children who have this variety of unexplained powers that stem in some way from the yellow-eyed demon. And as of now, Sam and Dean have not been able to trap the demon, have not been able to track it down, though they do have Ash at the roadhouse kind of looking into it. The only other important thing that's happened so far this season is in the previous episode, Croatoan. Sam and Dean came across a town with a demon virus that Sam was mysteriously immune to, begging these questions of what exactly... What's up with Sam? The big question of season 2. What's up with Sam?
Accurate.
Yeah. That brings us to this episode and to our 30-second recap.
I feel like these are getting less scary.
Yeah, so I'm going to assume you're going to go first.
I would like to go first.
Awesome, wonderful.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Sam is really upset by the fact that John thought he might be a monster and that Dean's been staying quiet about it. Sam meets Ava, who's another special child who has a very similar ability to Sam in an almost suspicious kind of way. Gordon kidnaps Dean as bait to kill Sam. Ava's psychic ability allows Sam to outsmart Gordon. Sam, a white man who has literally and is about to again be pursued by the FBI, calls the cops on a black man without considering that Gordon might get killed. That's what I got.
Yeah. The solve at the end of this episode is
a little rough
questionable
in 2022.
Yes. Can you count me in?
Yes. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so Sam and Dean have a bit of a blow up because Dean tells him finally what John told him about John being worried about Sam going dark side. So Sam decides he's going to leave and go and try and investigate on his own. He meets Ava, another one of the special children, and they find out about a third special child who also was killed kind of strangely, and turns out Gordon is hunting all the special children, and they are able to outsmart him, and that's the episode.
Though I have to say, I was really concerned when we got like midway through the episode. I was like, Wait, I don't know if Ash is in this one. I know we go to the Roadhouse for like 3 seconds.
I forgot Ash was in this one and had the delightful surprise of being like, oh, we get an Ash scene. Yay. Every time we're in the Roadhouse, I just want.
I have a real new appreciation for Ash. Like, I don't think I've appreciated Ash until I started doing the podcast and like got like to start to look forward to season 2. I was like, actually, no, Ash was an excellent character.
Mm-hmm. It's now time for us to discuss this episode through our chosen theme. And this week, our theme is trauma. Not
This
to be
came-
heavy-handed or anything.
Yeah, startlingly easy.
Yes.
I mean, I've been lucky. The last like 2 like themed episodes I've been on have been like trauma and survival, which are pretty core themes
yeah.
to Supernatural and to this season.
I'll have to throw you into an episode with like a more niche theme that we have to hunt for more next time. Make it challenging. Do you have a place you want to start?
I mean, I feel like this episode like immediately opened with someone actually going to therapy, like in our opening scene.
Right.
And they were immediately punished for it.
That's
Both the
true.
therapist and the patient. I think his name's Scott something.
Yeah.
Yeah, like both of them immediately get killed. Or I know, I guess just Scott, but
but it's immediately like this compounding trauma. Like
yeah. I'm like, oh, like you're undergoing some sort of trauma and you're actually dealing with it the way normal people are supposed to deal with trauma by seeking professional help, and like immediately gets killed for it.
Yeah, and immediately like isn't believed. You can tell that his like he doesn't have a lot of rapport with this therapist. Like you can
Yeah, totally. This therapist was very like dismissive and like
and
not
suspicious
yeah
of him. Like the therapist doesn't, and like, it's good that the therapist doesn't shake his hand, because presumably if he had, like, he would also have died. Like it's good. Like I don't want to be like he should have done it, but like it was this opportunity in a normal therapy session in a non-supernatural universe would be an ability to extend connection.
I have more questions now about the special children's abilities than ever, because presumably it seems like maybe Scott can control his.
It's really
like he can
unclear.
Turn it on and off, and like other special children definitely can't. Like Sam and Ava don't seem to have, like Sam sort of can turn his on when he needs to,
right, but not like on cue, just sort of in
general.
Yeah, and we saw him do it kind of in situations of like real danger.
Yeah,
like the time he rescues Dean for that.
Like he got like the telekinesis part, like when he really, really needed it, and then never again.
And he doesn't have control over when they appear.
Yeah, and Ava doesn't seem to either. Scott, it sounds like maybe he can a little bit, which is interesting.
Which makes me think of Max, because Max had, I think, of all of the children. I mean, Andy as well.
Andy is starting to. I think by the time we see Andy again, he has a better handle on it.
Yes, but he has the ability. He knows how to use it. But it's also just like these skills are. What's interesting about the special children is these skills are so varied. Like you think about it, like even like Andy's skill, yes, it like becomes traumatic in his first episode,
but it's not that. He's having a good time before that.
It's not an intrinsically traumatic skill, whereas like every other
Lily.
one that we've seen is. Like every single other one.
Like when we get to the end of the season, we meet other ones. Like Lily, like cannot turn hers off, and like it's really bad.
Yeah,
hers is inherently traumatic, and
and so are Sam and Ava's. Like they only have visions of people dying.
Sam wasn't already in this like obscure hunter lifestyle where he's exposed to death all the time, this would be traumatic. I think I wrote that in my notes. Like Sam and Ava, like seeing these like visions of people dying.
Yeah.
Like it's traumatic.
Yeah. And Ava has a very normal sort of response to it. I made a note about that as well, about how we all have this, like our bar for like how we interpret like what is traumatic is based on our experience. And so like Ava, who has, as far as we know, had a really normal life, hasn't had anything supernatural happen to her other than this, up until this point, her bar for what trauma is a particular thing. And so she like has this huge reaction to like seeing these visions and realizing that they can come true. Whereas Sam, he does have a reaction, but it's different because he's always known the supernatural was real. It's like a
Yeah.
different kind of trauma. It's a different kind of trauma for Sam than it is for
At every
Ava.
point, we really get that. At any time that there's a scene with the two of them together in this episode, I think we really get like this is normal for me and it's crazy. And then we get Ava being like, this is not normal for me. And you're right. It's crazy.
Ava being like, your life terrifies me.
Yes.
Also, who are you? And why do you know how to do? How can you look at a casing from a bullet and be like, I know exactly where this came from. Who knows that?
And that bullet was just shot at you.
Yeah. And who's calm enough to be able to figure out the details of that when someone's just tried to kill them? Sam Winchester is who.
Yeah. And then like we get when John initially told Dean this thing, we didn't know what this was, but now we know what it is. But like it's the trauma of John dying, and now like Sam is getting like traumatized again by the fact that he is learning this for the first time, and it's really not just shifting his like this immediate situation of like what is happening to me, but also like, did my dad ever think I was normal? Or like,
right, did my dad think I could be saved? And it makes me, even just like angry at John again, because like we know so much of their childhood was traumatizing, and so much of that can be traced directly back to John's choices. But the fact that John, in his death, threefold traumatizes Dean. He traumatizes Dean by the deal that he makes. He traumatizes Dean by dying, and he traumatizes Dean by telling him this and giving him this like mission
he has to live with. Yeah. If Sam had been dying instead of Dean, would John have made that deal? Because
absolutely
John,
not.
Yeah,
absolutely not.
Like, and what would John have said to Dean? Like, I feel like anything John said to Dean would be less traumatizing than to be like, I'm not going to save Sam. Like, Sam's just going to die. I feel like anything John would say to Dean there would somehow be less traumatizing than John sacrificing himself to save Dean and being like, you might have to kill Sam, because Dean cannot do it.
Well, and I think, I'm trying to remember if we talked about this at all in our premiere episode, but I don't think we did because we weren't here yet. But now that we know what John said to Dean, it kind of begs this question of like, what is the reason that John made the deal? And like, there's a piece of it for sure that's like him saving his son. But I also wonder, I've always like wondered this, of like, is part of the reason that John makes this deal because he needs someone to watch out for Sam? And by watch out, he doesn't just mean protect him. By watch out, he means like stop him from going dark side.
Stop him from, yeah.
And he knows, because of his own relationship with John, because he's burned his bridges with Sam, John knows that he's not gonna be able to do that. Like if Dean dies, there's no way Sam and John stay hunting together for very long.
Oh no,
maybe briefly.
Sam's going back to school.
Yeah, or he's going to go hunt on his own. He's not going to hunt with John because they clash, and he's not going to put up with that. So like,
Sam's
John
saying,
knows,
call me when you find the demon again and I'll show up. Like,
yeah, that's true. And so like John, knowing that, goes, the best chance for like making sure Sam doesn't go dark side is for me to actually make sure that Dean survives. And so like even his saving of Dean becomes all tied up in like the mission to defeat the demon and the mission to like.
Well, and John's always seen himself going out that way. Like John himself is traumatized. Speaking of trauma, John has been traumatized for like 2 decades, like by what happened to Mary, and probably by stuff he saw before that. Like he was in the military.
Yeah.
He wasn't having a great, his dad went missing when he was a little kid. Like he's not led the best life himself up to this point. And then like this Mary gets killed and it's very traumatic for him. Mm-hmm. And John basically decides he's gonna kill the thing that killed Mary or die in the process. And I think he just reached the point where he was like, I think when Sam didn't shoot him, I think that was a big contributing factor, like in the season 1 finale. And he went, I was supposed to die doing that. And then the opportunity kind of just like presented itself for him to make that sacrifice. And he was like, okay, now's the time.
Which makes me think of like, when we're thinking of trauma in terms of this whole episode, of like those differing kind of responses to trauma, because we see that's a example of like John's response to trauma. A lot of it has been to direct all of his energy at the demon and direct all his energy at that, instead of looking to address that trauma and actually, experience it and move through it and
raise his children.
make any good choices for his family. And then we get Sam and Dean in this episode with different responses to the traumas they've experienced. Like, I think Sam, when Dean tells him, Dean is expressing this trauma and Dean's like just really, really afraid. You don't get the impression at all that he is going to do what John said. You just get this like fear of like, what did John mean? Why would he have said that? What else did John know that he didn't tell you?
He repeats a couple of times and pretty loudly and harshly that he's not going to kill Sam. He just needs to like make sure that Sam is fine.
Yeah, he just wants to know what they're dealing with, I think, is what kind of comes across, is that he just like, he wants them to pump brakes. He wants them to stop. He wants them to figure out what is going on, because he's like, there's not enough information. But you don't ever get the impression that he's like, oh, I'm going to find out. And then if I find out, then I'm going to kill Sam. Like, that doesn't, based on everything we know,
he's going to figure out a way to save Sam. The options were save Sam or kill Sam. He is going for save.
Yeah, he's not, those options are not like, it's not legitimately two options. But it's interesting because Sam's response, I don't think Sam, especially in that first scene where they're arguing, I don't think Sam is really hearing that from Dean. I think Sam is so caught up in Sam's first fear and the significant trauma of like what John said for Sam is about like the reason that he might have to kill Sam. It's about like, did Dad think I was impure? Did Dad think I was evil? Am I going to go dark side? Am I going to become a monster? And that's like the thing that's traumatizing for Sam. It's not the concept that Dean might kill him.
There's like an added layer of like betrayal because Dean's known this for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And Dean is the only person in the whole world that Sam trusts.
Yeah.
And so like, it's not even so much that Dean might hurt him or harm him in some way. It's that Dean had this vital information about him and didn't share it.
Mm-hmm. And
that just adds a layer of sting.
Yeah, that's like the trauma. Well, and it makes me think like the trauma of like he's been living with this since season 1. Since before season 1, we knew he was having dreams about, he was having these visions before Jessica died. These powers have been progressing and he's had no answers except that he's not the only one. And so it's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And they've had experiences with multiple special children going dark side. So they had, or not even just going dark side, but using their powers in violent ways. So with Max, we saw again, in terms of trauma, Max's response to the trauma was to use his powers to try and protect himself and to kill people. And also in the episode of Andy's twin, same kind of thing, using his powers to traumatize other people because of his own trauma. And so Sam is like got to be looking at that as being like, all these special children are going dark side for very legitimate traumatized reasons. I'm also a traumatized person. I lost my mom, I lost my girlfriend, I've been on the road hunting, like everything in my life kind of sucks. At what point do I become like so some of the trauma for Sam is even coming from his own self like awareness. Like Sam is aware of everything he's experienced, and Sam is aware, I think, even of the fact that his own anger, his own hurt, his own like pain has been building and building and building with no place to go. And we've seen that a few times with Sam too, where like there's been opportunities. I think of like in Asylum really, really early in season 1, where they have the ghost that makes you angry, and Sam has a history of anger issues. Yeah, Sam has a history, even halfway through season 2, like Sam's battle with anger, which is always really connected to his trauma, is really, really prominent. And now Sam is like, what do I do with this? And then Sam's response to that trauma in this episode is to kind of be like, I need to go and solve this. It's interesting because like Sam's like, I can't wait. Dean's like, maybe we need to take a little bit of a break. We need to like the last episode, we're recording this a bit in advance, but the last episode that we released, episode 5, and we talked about a Twitter account called Swear Natural that
I love Swear Natural.
It's my favorite. It's my favorite. And anyway, Dean is saying, we need to pump the brakes. And Sam is going like, absolutely not. Like, there is a very present danger right now, and I am going to like go
In
and
true
solve this.
Sam fashion, really. Sam's always
Yeah.
like, we need to do all the research and get ahead of the problem, like right now. Like, he's
Yeah.
not one to wait around. Like, oh, like you say Dean's gonna die in a couple weeks, I'll just stay up for 3 days straight and research ways to save him. Like, that's Sam's character.
Yeah, that's true. This is like not, well, Sam's, it's really just interesting because like the show, especially at the beginning, likes to present like Dean as like this like devil may care kind of attitude, like he's kind of reckless, but we see way more like extreme reactions to things from Sam.
Oh
like
yeah, Sam is like jumping in with both feet and
yeah, not thinking about the consequences,
yeah,
or like thinking about the consequences and going, nope, still gonna do it. Like
yeah,
Sam
the
knows this is
consequences don't outweigh the Sam is a Slytherin if I ever saw one.
yes, this is very true. Sam is a Slytherin. He's like, nope. So in this, you know,
I mean, it's time for Harry Potter to stop being the cultural reference, but
yes, it really,
it very
really,
much
really
is the cultural reference.
Yes, we all know what we mean when we say that. But you know, yeah. but the idea that like Sam is,
Someone who just like looks at a situation and goes, yeah, the like cons don't outweigh the pros, so we're just gonna do it and like bad things be damned.
yeah, that's like thoughtfully reckless. Like
Yeah.
Sam does things that will have very big consequences. He doesn't do them thoughtlessly, which is I think why he comes across.
I think that's the thing too, is like when Dean does do something that has such drastic consequences, he doesn't actually think about those consequences that much.
No.
Whereas Sam will do the exact same thing with the exact same consequences, but he's already thought about them. He's just like, I thought about them. They didn't matter to me that much.
He's like, they weren't worth it. They were worth it. The risk was worth it.
Yeah.
Which in this episode is exactly what happens. He goes, I'm gonna leave, I'm gonna go do my thing. Kind of moving from that, I wanted to
we need to actually get through this episode.
I wanted to briefly talk about the interaction Sam and Ellen have, and this is just probably a fairly short note, but like Ellen, you know, Joe and Ellen have experienced a lot of trauma, and since the last time we've seen them, they've experienced a new trauma, which for Ellen is like Joe has gone off to hunt on her own.
Yes.
But what I really appreciated about Ellen, because I just love Ellen, and what I really appreciated is that Ellen doesn't project that trauma onto the Winchesters, even though like Ellen or Joe went off hunting after the hunt she did with Sam and Dean, but Ellen has the ability to like separate the traumatic nature of that from the Winchesters. She doesn't blame them. She says, I forgave your dad a long time ago. She very clearly differentiates between like the decisions Joe has made and why Joe made those decisions. And she doesn't make Sam and Dean responsible for like how she's doing with that, which I just like really
appreciate as a mom.
That's
a good mom.
Ellen having a healthy response, or like not a healthy response, because we're talking about trauma. It's like very complex, but Ellen having a response to trauma that's not to then turn around and traumatize all of the people around her.
Yeah, 100%. I wrote in my notes that like, Ellen is handling the lasting trauma of Bill's like death, and John Winchester's like part in it is like separate from her treatment of the boys and her treatment of her own daughter. Like
she recognizes Joe's autonomy when she's talking about it. Like she didn't want Joe to go off hunting. We know that from their big fight in 206, but she has clearly like come to grips with that and is letting Joe, is kind of recognize that Joe's going to make her own decisions. And
like if you think, so it's Joe and Ellen are not unlike John and Sam when Sam wanted to go to college, except the opposite.
They're the flip.
Joe is supposed to be going to college, instead she's out hunting. But John was like, you're not going to college under my roof, like you're hunting, and like if you leave you're not coming back, and Sam just left and never came back, whereas Ellen's like, you're not hunting under my roof, and like she's not telling the story of anger, which you can imagine that would be a angry statement.
Yeah.
When she's retelling it, there's no anger in it. And Joe just kind of goes, okay, I just won't live under your roof then. But like it's very clear she's welcome back. Like,
yeah, it's not like a cutting off of Ellen hasn't cut off the relationship. She
like,
hasn't
still
traumatized Joe in
communication.
Yeah.
Like Joe sends postcards and like,
right.
they're in
Ellen
some
knows
sort
where
of,
she is.
Yeah.
Or at least knows that she's off hunting and
has a general idea of where she would be.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think she also knows and respects Joe's abilities.
Also, I'm sure Ash knows like down to like the like GPS point.
Yeah, which also brings up a thing in terms of like trauma and like your ability to be resilient with trauma and your ability to respond to it. So like Ellen and Joe have like this network of hunters around them. They have like community, they have resources to get through. So like Ellen knows that she probably could get in contact with Joe if she needed to, through Ash. And like in contrast to the Winchesters, who, when Sam and Dean were looking for John for months, they like had very few resources to handle that trauma. And sure enough, that like comes back to bite them when they do meet John. They don't have the ability to kind of work through the abandonment and the like traumatic stuff that have happened.
Yeah, and I also noticed like Ellen's response was, well, I have to call Dean and tell him that you were here, which is such a mom response, because Ellen is a mom.
Yeah.
But also like Dean is so mom coded. And like that's such a mom to mom like acknowledgement.
yes I wrote down a line. Oh yes, the line when Ellen says to Dean, she says, they say you can't protect your loved ones forever. And I was like, why does that line sound just slightly off? And I'm like, no, it's because like usually that line is said in the context of like parents about their children. You go like, you can't protect your kids forever. Like, which is so interesting that Ellen, who is a literal parent, is saying this to Dean, who has been functionally a parent for Sam, Yeah. It's the parental coding of Dean in this episode is striking. I also appreciate Ellen is, I think, the first person. Okay, not the first person. Dean has also said this to Sam at a couple of points, but Ellen is like an external person who says Sam like none of this is your fault. Who identifies that his trauma is like not something he's caused, not something he deserves, not something that he asked for. And like Sam really, really needed to hear that.
I need to hear that about Sam's trauma.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I just want to give Sam a sandwich, a blanket, and a hug at all times.
Yeah.
That would solve so many of his problems.
Yeah. And just be like, you know what? Guess what? You're good. You're not evil. You can stop. You can take a break.
We're still in the safe zone in season 2, as far as like Dean providing a lot of Sam like emotional support. I think after I think past season 3 is what I think like other people need to start telling Sam that they love him.
yes, because after a certain point, especially with some of the events that are going to happen in season 2, 3, 4, Sam's self-concept is really traumatic. And honestly, that's starting here. Like that's starting with John's thing.
Like Ash and Ellen and Sam are talking about the like profile of the other special children, just like the general like how do we find these people? And I was like, all of these families have endured like the same trauma as the Winchesters, with like the like fatal fires, and then like all these people have like the same trauma as Sam with the nightmares and like the like isolating behavior that comes with those like nightmares and headaches and like gifts that they don't understand. And like some of the gifts are pretty horrible. Max used his in a pretty like upsetting way, and who knows what that like his started out like.
And his was like it makes me wonder, even with someone like Max, like his abilities were telekinesis, which is not inherently violent. The reason that Max goes to that is because Max is trying to take control.
Already
He's trying to take,
traumatized.
he's trying to take control of trauma that had nothing to do with the supernatural, trauma that just was about like power hungry men in his life who were hurting him. And so he uses the only resource he has, which is these powers, to try and take some control back. But then that compounds
Scott
this trauma.
is very clearly like not having a great time. He's very clearly like he's on all kinds of medications. He's going to therapy.
He's scared. He's scared of himself.
Yeah, he's scared of the things he can do. Sam and Ava are both like witnessing death on a regular basis. And like Sam's have been personal. Like Ava's don't seem to have been personal.
No.
But Sam's have been personal on multiple occasions.
And I think Sam's are personal because he's in the hunting world, so he can draw those lines. So like Ava is like, it is freaky that I am seeing this, but Ava does not in any way think that makes her evil. She's like, what is happening to me? Whereas Sam is asking the question of like, what about me is wrong? Why is it me that this is happening to? We talked back in episode 5 about the idea of like sanctuary, and Sam, you know, the sanctuary of like Sam's identity is being kind of ripped from him in this season, because he's more and more being like, who am I? Can I trust myself? What is there something evil in me? Am I going to go dark side? Like that whole, even that Star Wars reference, like the idea that
something's going wrong with him, and maybe it's been wrong all along.
And maybe it'll eventually be irreparable. Maybe eventually you'll go too far and you can't be saved.
Yeah.
And that's terrifying. Like Sam's identity is on the line here. And that's like a huge,
and it's something that's very important to him too. Like that's something he values. Like he's always valued being different from Dean and John, but now he's realizing like the thing that makes him different from Dean and John might be something inherently evil or bad. Right.
And Sam's always been also like the one with a really, really strong moral compass and a really strong sense of like, if I'm going to be hunting, like we have to do this right. We have to do this ethically. We're going to give people the opportunity to do the right thing. We're not going to shoot first and ask questions later. Like we are going to, hunting has to be about,
and I think that's something
protecting
else
people
that John then puts on Dean by telling Dean this secret is Sam's morality. Because
yes, exactly.
He doesn't trust Sam. He doesn't trust Sam's morality to stay intact.
Which traumatizes them both, because it plants this seed in Dean's mind of like Dean's already been made responsible for Sam's physical safety his whole life.
But now Sam's always been of like good moral character.
Right. He's never had to worry about that, and he's never thought he was responsible for that. Now he's like, the responsibility for like Sam's morality is on Dean, and like we already know that Dean, because of this like traumatizing childhood, has this complex around taking responsibility for things that like aren't his responsibility, and that's like starting to be, I think, a really, really traumatizing thing that I think is going to cause a lot of the issues between the two of them as we go forward. Like we're going to see them fight about good and evil and about morality and about identity a lot in the next couple of seasons. And I think, they're going to misunderstand each other a lot. And a lot of it starts here with what they think they're responsible for, and Sam's differentiating of himself as like different, and Dean's like attaching of himself as like ultimately responsible for Sam. And that's just going to like clash over and over and over again, which is it's bad. It's bad. As a small note, I thought of the fact that they have a code word for when someone has a gun on you is like preparing to be traumatized.
Exactly. Normal people do not have that.
No. You have, it's like that. It's a smart strategy to have that you only need if you're expecting to be traumatized.
Yeah, if you're expecting someone to ever have a gun on you, which I'm sure they have needed more than one occasion. Like,
he still knows this code, and like presumably this could have been developed in season 1, or maybe this is something that's existed
probably
not.
Existed since they were kids.
And we're going to see a couple of other instances throughout the seasons where they have ways of communicating that are based on, I mean, we're going to see even in the next, we saw in episode 7, we saw some strategies that they have to communicate when they're not together.
I have a question that maybe you'll remember. I haven't watched a lot of the middle up to now in the season.
Fair enough.
How much of Gordon's backstory do we know at this point?
Okay. Actually, I'm going to pull that up because I
know the specifics about Gordon's sister.
Yes, because that was in 203. I'm just going to pull it up so that we get it right here. Yes. Okay. Yes, we do because Gordon says it in the first confrontation that they have.
Okay.
When they're fighting the vampires, Gordon says,
Oh, I like that the seasons are sorted by showrunner era.
Right?
I honestly don't even remember who took over from Sarah Gale.
It's yes.
So Gordon has his own set of trauma, his own personal trauma from what happened to his sister, and then generational trauma of being a Black man in America.
Yes, Gordon is really interesting, and maybe that's where we'll kind of go with the final part of our theme discussion is Gordon. Gordon's been shaped by trauma, and the decisions he's making are all based on that.
What he's asking Dean to do is to kill Sam for the greater good.
Mm-hmm.
And usually the argument is you wouldn't ask someone to do something you wouldn't do yourself, but Gordon has done it.
Well, exactly. Gordon knows what it's like to kill a sibling who had gone evil, or who he was worried about going evil. That's what makes it so striking. It's what makes Gordon actually, I think, quite frightening in this episode, is that at every point, he's going to follow through. He won't be connected.
Yeah, and he's really smart about it. He's I know exactly what Sam's gonna do, so I did this, and then he'll do this, so I'll do this.
Gordon's a really good hunter.
Smart. Yeah, Gordon is everything that John Winchester's not.
Gordon is, and we saw that in 203 the first time we met Gordon. We saw his skill level, his ability to track, his ability to make connections, and his interpersonal skills of how he takes charge of a hunt and how he communicates with other hunters.
He's not the friendliest hunter, but up until the point where Sam called Ellen and Ellen was walk away, they were getting along fine with Gordon, and they're not used to getting along with other hunters.
No, because they also don't have experience with it, so they don't even have experience with it almost seems from this episode, I was thinking about how we kind of have two different kinds of hunters that we kind of have seen. We've seen hunters that are a lot like Ellen and Joe, where we've seen a bit of different perspectives, where we see with Ellen and Joe, we see, and I think we also see this with a couple other hunters early on, they're not focused on, it's not necessarily preventative. It's we see a bad thing happening and we stop it.
Yeah.
Gordon and some other hunters
thinking ahead. He's thinking Sam's not a monster yet, but every other person that we know of Sam has turned out to be pretty bad. So
yeah, it's an identity thing too, because other hunters that we've seen are something that's supernatural. If it's a supernatural being,
it's very black and white.
Yeah,
either you're human or you're not, and once you do anything that's on the not side, it doesn't matter.
Right.
You're
But
just
for
not.
some hunters, it seems to be a, like, when you do something that's on the not side.
Yes.
And then for other hunters like Gordon, and I think John probably gets in, John is also in this category, that like their very identity, it's a vampire.
Yeah.
We kill it. Doesn't matter if it's hunted, doesn't matter if it's killing people. Its
Whereas I think
identity makes it bad.
the boys, and specifically Sam in particular,
Mhm.
are more like, if you do something that's monstrous, then and
Yeah.
you are supernatural, then we will kill you. And even if you're not supernatural, if you do something monstrous, we might still kill you just by chance.
Yeah, and there's like complex, and they have been navigating that like all season. Like in episode 3, the first time we met Gordon, we saw a huge shift from Dean
into
where
that.
they choose, where he has to make that discovery of like, I'm going to choose not to hunt these vampires.
It's interesting that Gordon and John are so similar that way, because Gordon is very much reinforcing the beliefs and expectations that John placed on Dean.
Yes.
John was like, if you can't save Sam, kill him. And Gordon's like, you have to kill Sam for the greater good. Like, that's very much in line with what John wants from Dean and what John expected from Dean.
Yeah.
Just when Dean is like free of John, then like Gordon arrives in their lives, and he is very much a proponent of those same beliefs and expectations.
And the only reason that doesn't play out the way, like even in episode 3, Dean has a really good rapport with Gordon until it comes to Sam, and then
once Sam's involved.
And Sam appeals to Dean and goes like, we have to think about this, like we can't just kill things just because they're not human. If they haven't done anything wrong, then like they're no more deserving than a human of being killed. And Sam appeals to Dean on that, and then Sam also is an example of that. And I think like, even Dean mentions that like Sam's got more of a conscience than Dean does. Like, it's interesting that Sam is like the one struggling with, is my identity evil? Because so much of the show so far has been him
every once
being
in a
Dean's
while,
moral compass.
Every once in a while, Sam does get like, some things are just bad. And it's just every once in a while out of the blue. And I think it stems from himself, of this like lifelong struggle of, am I good or am I bad?
Right.
Even before he was doing anything supernatural, as far as we are aware.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, like when you're thinking about like the last conversation, I think it's kind of connected to the way both Sam and Dean think about like destiny and identity, because at the end of the episode, Sam says to Dean, you're a hunter, it's what you were meant to do. And then Dean goes like, I don't believe in destiny. I don't believe in any of that destiny crap. Like, I wasn't meant to do anything. It's interesting because Sam, and this is going to play out through the rest of the show too, like Sam has Sam has a bit more of a fixed identity, idea of identity that is very tied to like destiny. And Sam's a lot more likely, as the show progresses, to be like, well, destiny said that this was going to happen, so like it's going to happen. Dean's a lot more likely to be like, I don't believe in that, and they're both going to struggle with being proven wrong in those ways, where like they're going to see sometimes that they can't outrun destiny, but they're also going to see sometimes that they can. And it's going to make this, it's just really interesting how they're different in that initial belief, and that even shows up in a literal conversation in this episode.
Yeah. I have another like 2 quick little things.
Do it.
Trauma related.
Yes, do it.
So basically, Sam like walks into a trap knowingly because it's Dean.
Like we said earlier about the like, I will take a risk because it's better than the alternative.
Yeah. And Dean is tied to a chair, and he basically like listens to what he thinks is his absolute worst nightmare. Where he literally thinks Sam's dead for a minute.
Yeah.
It's not a very long minute, but I'm sure if you're the one tied to a chair thinking you just heard your brother die, it feels like a very long minute. and
your brother died, like, and like Gordon, like this is like Gordon is like narrating.
I don't think I've ever watched someone like set a tripwire before. Like, I've seen a lot of people fall victim to a tripwire. I don't think I've ever like seen like someone set one up, and like That's see true. Gordon like set this whole thing up. It's complex.
It's like a drawn out scene too. Like I think one of the filming and like narrative pieces that they do really well in this episode is they drag this out. They draw it out.
We have the plan explained to us. We see it get set up. We see it executed twice, like at the beginning of the episode and at the end.
And it's really unclear both times as to what the real
If
result
Sam
is
alive or not.
Yeah, and
I
so
love
we get
the
to
image
experience
of the
that.
smoking boot. Like Sam's boot smoking is just
So
excellent.
good. It's very good. And like, yeah, like that is a trauma for Dean. Like he is.
And it's a trauma that is going to come up again and again as the Winchesters just start dying over and over. They haven't really had a lot of experience of that up to this point, but
Yeah.
you know.
But it's going to start being a thing. Well, and it's very interesting, even like considering where we've come, even in
And
this
every
episode.
time for them, it's pretty much traumatic.
Yeah.
Like, but also then like once they do get out of this situation, and they go to check up on Ava and her fiance, and they find her fiance like brutally murdered. It's
one of the worst,
bloodiest murders we've seen.
I think it is. Like I forgot how bloody
and like we see, that's the other thing too, is that we see it like a lot of times, like, you know, like we just see like a blood splatter, or like we'll see the body like at the morgue. Like no,
there's
we
a
see the
long
body
shot
still in the bed. It's bloody. It's pretty graphic. And like the Winchesters are just like, oh, I mean, sucks for that guy. I hope Ava's okay. Like they're more concerned about if Ava's okay or not. And I'm like, are you guys not reacting to this body over here?
Maybe you should like react more traumatically to this situation. Like,
you're not gonna dream about that.
I guess there's enough other things. This is just it gets filed in the many traumatic things they've seen in their lives.
Yeah. Not to be spoilery, but like I just watched like the flashback from season 15 where Dean actually admits that it's like one of the first times and only times that Dean admits he has nightmares about the things that he sees, because I remember in season 1 he specifically said he doesn't have nightmares about anything ever.
right, because that makes sense.
A lie, but
yeah.
But then also just with like them, like, just I don't know, this is just some random dude and we see dead people all the time, like
you get like to survive, they've had to become kind of desensitized to a lot of things that should be really traumatic.
I really liked that like aspect of like Ava and Sam. I think in this episode was really effective at that, because like sometimes the stakes feel like get low because we just get like we get desensitized to it. Also
we get desensitized to characters that don't survive because we know that, you know,
and like especially minor characters or like the cold open characters, like you see someone in cold open of Supernatural, you know that at least one of the people on the screen is going to be dead before the title card comes up. Like that's just how the show is formatted.
Yeah. And so I appreciate when the show reminds us that like
those people matter.
It's a fake story, you know, it's a fake TV show, but also, you know, those people have to matter because that's the whole premise of like the show. That's what makes the show meaningful.
As much as Sam and Dean matter to each other, those people matter to their families and their friends.
And just because they're not the primary characters in this story doesn't mean they aren't the primary characters in their own stories. And, you know, honoring that and recognizing that that's like a lot of, you know, if we're going to care about the characters we do care about, we also have to like care about the characters that are going to be really minor because they're just as important.
I think that's all I had in my notes.
I think the one last note that I have, if you don't have any other notes, is that like I made a note about how a huge point in this episode is that the brothers, like both Sam and Dean, kind of refuse to buy into the like destiny crap that both John and Gordon and the demon are all sort of peddling. Like they, you know, trauma. We all
Which
have
is the major theme of Supernatural is free will, and that all these plans and manipulations from outside forces don't matter as long as you stick with each other and try and do the right thing.
That ultimately you do have a choice, that every character in the show has a choice, and the world and various powers will try and manipulate your choice, will try and influence your choice, but you still have choice.
At the end of the day, it's your choice and you have to make it.
Yeah, and you can't control everything that happens to you, but you can control your response. And even when we think about like trauma, nobody who's been traumatized is responsible for like redeeming their trauma or making the best of their trauma. Like, that's not the point we're trying to make at all. But what is interesting is that like everyone who's been traumatized has an explanation and an understanding of that trauma and a narrative around that trauma. And what the demon and John and Gordon are all trying to tell Sam and Dean is that like the response to this trauma is, Dean, you be a good hunter and you kill bad things, and Sam, sucks for you, you're a bad thing, you get killed. That's the answer to the trauma, is like that's the narrative. But this episode and this whole season are largely about like them sort of bucking that and being like, who says that's true? Like, who says that has to be true? But if it's not true, what do we do? And they still don't have an answer for that yet. So that's gonna be the rest of this season, and actually
the show.
That's just the show. That's just the show. You're right. These are narrative threads we're going to be pulling for another 13 years. So yeah, I think that ends our theme discussion. So we're going to move into our going meta segment, where we're tracking lore, Bechdel test, pop culture, and all that fun stuff. First off, we have our death counter for this episode. There are 3 deaths within this episode. Bechdel test.
It fails. There were 2 women, but they did not interact with each other. So.
Yep. Next, we have our lore check, and there's so much lore in this episode.
Yeah, like the special children like lore like continues. More more another person, like another 2 special children are introduced. One who will be recurring. And one who is killed, but who was actually like in contact with the yellow-eyed demon.
Yeah, there's some kind of progression, and there seems to be some sort of like direction from the yellow-eyed demon related to violence. Moving on to locations, the shot by the fence, the first conversation they have by the fence is in Fort Langley, same as in the previous episode. It's in a really beautiful like park that I know really, really well because I live not super far from it. And then they also film like kind of with the SkyTrain station in the background, which is like the big train system that goes all around Vancouver. And in terms of story locations, we have the Roadhouse, we have Indiana, and we have Illinois. Pop culture. Anything that you noticed that we haven't kind of already talked about?
I don't think so. I can see you have a couple in your notes. Aside from that, I don't have anything.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the Star Wars references. Funky Town is a song. And I also noticed the song at the beginning, the first scene with Steve, is a song with a lot of Alice in Wonderland references. A song called White Rabbit.
Which is a good song.
Good song. It's a good song. It just caught, like, I usually notice the music, but not like super consciously. This was an episode where I like noticed the initial song and was like,
I spent a lot of time thinking about the music of Supernatural. Like that is a thing I'm acutely interested in. This was good.
Yeah, I appreciate when people notice more explicit things, because that's not always my first instinct.
Songs with like Alice in Wonderland references in particular are really interesting choices.
Yeah, that's pop culture. Last up we have gaydar, sexuality and gender.
I have something for this.
You have something for this? Wonderful, because I don't have really a lot for this in this episode, so take it away.
It's pretty much the like, like this, like the very popular saying of, how do we know that Cass and Dean are in love? Because Cass and Sam aren't in love. The same holds true with Ash.
Okay, yes. Ash, actually, that was the one thing I did notice, and I was trying to figure out how to say it.
In the scene with Ash and Sam and Ellen, they're like sitting, and the way that Ash is like body languages is the same like close contact, flirty body language that he uses when he was talking, like in every scene he's ever talked to Dean. But Sam is just sitting there like indifferent to it. He's more interested in what Ash is saying. He's not reacting to that aspect of the conversation at all.
There's no physical reaction. There's no like moving of his body towards whereas with Dean, if you go back and look at the scenes with Dean and Ash,
he doesn't move closer or away or anything. He's just like not even noticing.
He's there's no radar for him. He's like, if Ash is flirting, Sam has no idea, or just doesn't care. So Sam's like, his body language is very like disinterested. He's only
whereas Dean is like acutely aware of like what Ash's body is doing in relation to what his body is doing in every scene they have together.
Yes, that is a great observation. It's now time for the fanfiction recommendation of the week. These are not necessarily connected to the episode itself because it's very difficult to find season 2 fanfiction that isn't Wincest, and we're not about that. Recommendations are just based on what we've been reading, what we've been enjoying. So the one I'm going to recommend is actually, it is a finale fix-it, sort of. It's a 15/18 fix-it. It's called Break the Skin to Break the Barriers by Sobsicles. It's a story about tattoos. It's beautiful. Part of the reason for choosing it for this episode is it's a really interesting look at processing through trauma. That's obviously what we were talking about in this episode. It's a story about, Dean processing his trauma through tattoos and conversation. Do you have something you would like to recommend?
The only thing I've like been consistently reading lately has been the Down series by Philippi, aka Impalema 67. I live for my Wednesday or my Thursday weekly update. Like,
yep, it's a good fic.
But it's like an AU, so it is not plot related.
No.
But it is a Destiel fic.
It's good. It's a good one. These fics will be linked in the episode description. It's now time for us to pick a theme song for this week based on our discussion. So it's now time for our last part of the show, which is for us to pick a theme song for the week based on our discussion.
I have 2.
Awesome. Wonderful. I love that.
The first one is Hey Hey My My by Battle Me, specifically the one that was on the Sons of Anarchy soundtrack. My other one is a rock song acoustic by Loud and Swain, because which is a song I literally just heard today for the first time. I was listening to the new Loud and Swain single, and then my Spotify just like went on shuffle for like based on this song that you were listening to, and like I've heard most of their playlist, but I was listening to this one. I was like, this is a good one for this.
Those are great songs for this episode. Yeah, the song that I've chosen for this episode is God's Gonna Cut You Down by Johnny Cash. But specifically, I really like the Dead Posey version. It's a song about, running from your destiny, and that's
very appropriate for this episode.
There's a line that says, as sure as God made black and white, what's down in the dark will be brought to the light. And mostly just thinking about Sam's headspace in this episode. He's dealing with some fears about his own darkness, and we don't know what's going to happen. And
I thrive on the religious themes of Supernatural.
It's hard, same. Like, it's like a lot of what I'm here for, honestly. A lot of why I got into this show was I was like, oh, complex religious themes.
What is your shit siblings? If it's not inherently rooted in your religious trauma?
Especially if you're queer person with a lot of religious trauma, you're like, ooh, a show that explores like.
It's been really good to go back and look not just at like Dean's queer coding, but like Sam's queer coding. Sam, especially in like the first like 2 seasons.
Yes, this whole concept. With all these concepts about like purity and goodness and like identity.
I was like, I do need to talk more about Sam because I love Sam.
Yes, same. I'm really appreciating like doing this watch through again
to like shine. Like this is
like core Sam development is this season is like they're setting up who he is. I think that's why one of the reasons I really love this season. That brings us to the end of our show. You can subscribe to Driver Picks the Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow us on social media or join us on Discord where we're chatting about the show and about the episodes. And all of those links will be in the show notes. Thank you so much, KJ, for joining me again.
Thank you for having me. I would come back as many times as you would have me, honestly. If we'd met before either of us started our podcast, we'd probably only have one podcast.
I think that's absolutely true. So we will look forward to many collaborations in the future. So yeah, KJ, where can people find you and your show on the internet?
I mean, the easiest way to find me is on TikTok. My handle is SPN Opinions KJ, and my show is Supernatural Opinions. All of my bios have a link tree in them.
So you can find both of our shows. Definitely go listen to their show. It's so fun. They take a different kind of tack than we do. So they talk through the episode kind of chronologically. It's really, really fun. They have a lot of fantastic
We're
guests.
having a good time.
Thank you all for coming along for the ride if you've been listening today, and we wish you a peaceful road until we meet again. Next week, I will be joined by Jessie, also known as tired.gay on TikTok, and we are going to be discussing season 2, episode 11, Playthings, through the theme of peace. A note to our listeners. This episode was recorded prior to our season 3 name change, where we went from Driver Picks the Podcast to Saving People, Queering Things. For all of our new social media platforms, visit queeringthingspodcast.com.